benefit Russia. Joining us now is Democratic Senator Chris Coons of Delaware. He's on the Foreign Relations and Judiciary Committees, so your committees deal with all of these subjects. Senator James Baker, who was the general counsel for the FBI, he testified that he was concerned that there were discussions about whether the president was acting at the behest of and somehow following directions from Russia. Let me ask you, sir, did those thoughts ever cross your mind over the last 2 years?
Well, John, over the last 2 years, I have frequently been puzzled and concerned about President Trump's unprecedented closeness to President Vladimir Putin of Russia. He ran as an unconventional candidate, and he has certainly overperformed in that category. One of the ways in which he was a dramatic break from all other Republican candidates was his public professions of admiration for Putin, and then his repeated attempts at bridging the gap, at closing relations between the United States and Russia at exactly the time that our own intelligence community assessed that the Russians had successfully interfered in our last elections. As you may well recall, in the summer of 2017, the Senate, by a vote of 98-2, passed a comprehensive sanctions package to compel President Trump to take action against Russia, a package that he resisted, criticized, threatened to veto, but ultimately signed only when the vote was so overwhelming in the Senate. Yes, I have had significant concerns about what is motivating this unprecedented attitude towards Russia at exactly the same time that Russia has been so aggressive towards our allies and the United States.
All right. The other aspect of this is this reporting from the Washington Post over the weekend that the president has been hiding the details of his meetings with Vladimir Putin from members of his own administration, even going as far as to ask for the notes from the interpreter who was at the meeting. Now, Eric Swalwell, who is a Democrat in the House, says that destruction of evidence is evidence of guilt. Would you go as far as to suggest that the president's reluctance to release these details and ask for the notes is evidence that he's hiding something?
I wouldn't say that yet. I think that's exactly why we have the investigation being led by Robert Mueller, is to have professional investigators reach those conclusions. President Trump also has the highly unusual practice of ripping to shreds documents after he's reviewed them or even signed them in cases where they're drafts. There have been press reports that it's someone's job in the White House to pull documents out of the trash, tape them back together, and submit them to the archives because the president mishandles official presidential documents. So what I focus on here, what concerns me, is that when he's met with other heads of state, he has followed more traditional protocol in terms of briefing and including and reading in senior administration officials. With Russia, he hasn't done that. I am concerned about this report, about the treatment of the notes. I don't think it's conclusive. It has to be put in context.
What does it tell you, though, that he doesn't want the details of those meetings to go public?
It's very concerning. John, it's just one more piece of evidence that his relationship with both Russia generally and Vladimir Putin in particular deserves very close scrutiny.
Will you try to get that interpreter before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee? Not that you can. You don't run the committee, the Democrats
right.
and the minority in the Senate, but the House. Would you tell Eliot Engel, for instance, over in the House, your counterpart over there, who is the chair of the House Foreign Relations Committee, that they should try to speak with the interpreter and get their hands on those notes?
Absolutely. That is something I actively pressed for. The Judiciary Committee for a while had a functioning investigation into obstruction of justice. It ground down and then finally stopped because of partisan differences. The Republican majority wouldn't support our asking a series of, I think, relevant questions that the House Judiciary Committee will now take up on this specific question about how our president conducts meetings with foreign heads of state. I do think Chairman Engel in the House should be looking into this.
All right. It's day 24 of the government shutdown, the longest government shutdown in U.S. history. Senator Lindsey Graham over the weekend proposed reopening the government for 3 weeks, negotiating for those 3 weeks, and then if it doesn't work, the president would declare a national emergency. Would you support that avenue from Lindsey Graham?
I strongly agree with Senator Graham, that we should reopen the government, that the amount of harm this is causing to the American people is beginning to snowball, whether it's the TSA and FAA and NTSB not keeping our country as safe as they could, or it's food safety inspections or farmers all over the country being harmed, or 800,000 federal employees and their families. I agree we should reopen the government. Look, John, all of us support investing in border security. I don't expect the president to capitulate and expect no investment in border security, but I don't think Democrats are going to give him $5.7 billion for a wall either. We should be negotiating with a government that is open so we aren't harming our reputation in the world and our safety, security, and prosperity here at home.
Look, I know that President Trump said he would not support a deal that included DACA or provisions to give legal status for Dreamers on Friday. Then over the weekend, he criticized Democrats for not negotiating along those lines. But would you, sir, accept a deal that would include more money for border security, even a border barrier, if it did include protections, some new protections for Dreamers?
I co-sponsored and advocated for a bill that would have invested $25 billion over 10 years in exchange for significant movement, a pathway to citizenship for all Dreamers, and a number of other changes. But there was also oversight. This wasn't a blank check. This wasn't telling the president, here's $25 billion, go build whatever you want, wherever you want. So remember, that bipartisan deal that dozens of us supported did include regular annual oversight and a requirement that Department of Homeland Security assess the border and demonstrate that they were using the most appropriate technology. So I think there is room here, but what has to begin, the way this has to start, John, is for the president to take a position and stick to it. I feel like I'm stuck as a new member of the Trump of the Day Club. I don't know what position he's going to hold. Frankly, he might change his position before the end of this interview on Twitter. That's why Senator Graham himself is so frustrated. He and a number of other Republican senators have been trying to negotiate a resolution, and every time they make progress, the president throws cold water on it, even proposals advanced by his own vice president.
I just checked Twitter, and the president hasn't changed positions during this interview. However, I'm not quite sure, as of the beginning of this interview, what his initial position was. Senator Chris Coons from Delaware.
That's our core problem.
Great to have you.